Well then, good Saturday to all of you. This is the day we are going over the 9.0.5 patch notes. We are going to be looking at and talk about all the changes that will be coming live in 9.0.5 in just a few days. The next reset. We have, for the most part, covered all of these changes already in previous videos. As mentioned, the only ones left out are pretty much just the anima power changes for Torghast. So we're just gonna refresh everyone's memory about all the changes that are about to happen, as well as mentioning to you some of the changes in case you have missed them. There are, of course, different types of changes. We're gonna have to see the spells and talents and legendary and covenant ability changes for all the specs, and then you have the part where, let's just say, non-class, non-spec specific changes, things like companions and adventurers for your mission table, dungeon changes, Mythic Plus, as well as keystone and item level changes, anima acquisition, changes to PvP, changes to things like, very few, changes to things like Torghast and Demo, etc, etc. So let's just start with what we have seen in the past few weeks of the changes regarding classes and specs that will be coming live in 9.0.5, because there are some very interesting ones. As we are starting with the classes though, let's reiterate, let's remember for everyone that this is the patch intended by Blizzard to focus on the underperforming and underrepresented legendaries and covenant abilities. So it was an attempt on, essentially their plan was giving you more choice, trying to give you more choice to your spec, to your class, in what to choose with legendaries and covenant abilities. Spoiler, most of these attempts are going to fail horribly. Most of these covenants and legendaries are going to be exactly the same, the ones that you're going to be choosing before 9.0.5, after 9.0.5. But we do have some pretty good options that could become more mainstream, let's say. And it's good that we start with Death Knight, because Death Knight could be one of them. So the covenant abilities for Death Knight weren't really changed that much. Shackle the Unworthy and Death's Due were both buffed, but none of those are going to be particularly impressive to make you move away from Abomination Limb or from Swarming Mist if you're a Blood Death Knight. The more interesting changes for Death Knight were on their legendaries. Frost and Unholy were pretty much not changed, not touched in these changes. It was mainly focused around Blood. Blood has gotten buffs all around to their legendaries. Pheromones, Vampiric Aura, and Gorfin Domination were all buffed. They were small buffs, minor buffs. The real big buff was to Crimson Rune Weapon. Crimson Rune Weapon now causes Dancing Rune Weapon to generate 5 Bone Shield charges on use and reduces the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon by 5 seconds instead of 3. This is very good because one of the deadly problems of Blood Death Knights is finishing a pull with 2 Bone Shield charges and 20 runic power. They already see death looming in the next pack for them because they have very few defenses when they are in that situation. It's annoying, it's frustrating as a Death Knight knowing that not only you have to try to stay alive in the pull you're doing, but you also have to start thinking about pulling runic power and getting back up your Bone Shield before your next pull, because of how exposed you're going to be if you don't. That is pretty much a unique trait, a negative trait for the only tank that has this problem, this issue. This legendary is clearly going to help you when it comes to Bone Shield charges and of course extra defenses. When you use Dancing Rune Weapon, it's going to be up more often, it's going to be more available, it's going to give you overall, net you overall, similar amount of runic power as well as similar amount of single target damage of Super Strain, except that Super Strain pretty much gives you no defenses, no extra defensive capabilities compared to this legendary. This is a very interesting legendary that could become very powerful for Blood. So it's a good start. We are starting with Death Knight and we already have a decent change on the horizon. Yeah, Unholy and Frost were untouched. Unholy is understandable, Frost a little bit less. We could say we were expecting some positive buffs for Frost given the popularity of Unholy. Doesn't seem like it was a problem in the eyes of Blizzard. What certainly was a problem in the eyes of Blizzard was Vengeance Demon Hunter. So when we go and look at Demon Hunters, Havoc hasn't really gotten too much of a help. They have gotten Unbound Chaos buffed by a little bit. I mean, a little bit, almost twice as much, but it's not going to be that key, simply because Unbound Chaos is in the middle of a talent row with Glaive Tempest and Trial of Ruin, so it's very unlikely that this talent is going to do anything, even if it gets buffed. The legendaries for Havoc were also touched, not really big. The change to Fell Bombardment, a minor retouching of Burning Wound. Burning Wound was already planned to be buffed heavily. Now the dot goes from 5% of your AP, scaling to 100%, so now you have a pretty significant possibility to use multi-dotting as a Havoc Demon Hunter on multiple enemies. I know it sounds weird. The multi-dot DH. And then there is the other change to Darkler Medallion, which is also pretty interesting. Now you have a 40% chance instead of 20 to get a double cast, basically, to get a free cast of your beam, and the quality of life that now you also refund Fury when it procs, because Of course, if you use your beam, you are dumping all of your fury, which means even if you were to get the free cast, you have no more fury to cast the second one. So now you also get the refund. So these were pretty decent changes for Havoc, although you have to mention the issue for Havoc is single target. It's, heavy, sustained single target, and none of these changes are actually going to do much for the problem of Havoc. So yeah, good changes for Havoc, but not really focused on the main issue that they have. The more bigger changes were centered around Vengeance. Pretty much all of the Covenants, Elysian Decree, the Hunt, and Sinful Brand were all nerfed in damage only for Vengeance Demon Hunters. Repeat Decree was nerfed in base damage from 25% to 15% damage because of Vengeance Demon Hunter, and Fell Defender, their conduit reducing the cooldown of Fiery Brand, was also changed to be affecting Fell Devastation instead. So lots of focus on reducing the damage of Vengeance Demon Hunter. I'm not gonna say reducing the defensiveness too much, because Fell Defender affecting Fell Devastation is actually a decent change. It's not so much of a nerf. Your legendary Fiery Soul is already pulling a lot of weight when it comes to reducing the cooldown of Fiery Brand, and you have no synergy on your Fell Devastation. You have no talents, you have no legendaries, you have nothing that touches Fell Devastation, so having a conduit scaling throughout the expansion, reducing the cooldown of Fell Devastation is actually pretty good. You get plenty enough CDR on Fiery Brand, so I see this as a positive change. The rest though, not so much. There was a clear attempt from Blizzard on halting the damage of Vengeance Demon Hunter. And you have to say, even if you are Vengeance yourself, that it is warranted. The damage of Vengeance was a little bit out of control. Moving on to Druid, Druid has gotten very little. There's not much we can say about Druid. In the recap, Feral has gotten some minor changes to Katai Courier and Frenzy Band. I mean, Frenzy Band isn't really minor, it's pretty big, but it was so bad before that even buffing it by 50%, it can be considered minor. Guardian was basically not touched, and Restoration only got a minor change to Verdant Infusion, 2 extra seconds of hot extension when you use Swiftmend. It's only interesting, this change, because Verdant Infusion is already a decently popular legendary for Restoration. It's not, a completely dead, niche, hipster legendary. In high keys, for example, there is nearly 40% of Resto Druids using Verdant Infusion, so it's not very hipster. It's not like you were talking about Dark Titan's Lesson for Mythic Plus. So it's a pretty good change if you consider the amount of players actually using this legendary. When it comes to the abilities, there are some more thick changes because Restoration Druid was buffed in their throughput. Both Reju and Wild Growth were buffed significantly. And considering that like 70% of your healing comes from these two abilities, those are some pretty heavy buffs to Restoration. As we know, since we have been covering this week by week, Druid has lost a lot of representation in Mythic Plus compared to BFA. They have lost to Shaman, they are now losing also to Holy Paladin, and they are slowly creeping down to be even a match to Discipline Priest. In raids, of course, they are constantly excluded from the top 3, the trinity of damage reduction, Discipline, Holy Paladin, and Restoration Shaman. So now Blizzard is trying to give them some more throughput, even more throughput, to balance it. I don't think it's going to help too much in raids, because in raids damage reduction is always king, but in Mythic Plus this is actually really helpful for your throughput, for your HPS. And then you have the Covenant changes, which were expected. The 2 least represented Covenants for Druid were Adaptive Swarm and Ravenous Frenzy, and they were buffed, particularly Adaptive Swarm. Unfortunately, Adaptive Swarm, I actually like Adaptive Swarm. It's one of my favorite flavorful, you can say, Covenant abilities. However, as long as Convoke exists, it's hard seeing anything else being picked. I do believe that eventually, 8 months from now, a year from now, Ravenous Frenzy is going to become the main pick for Druids, purely because of scaling. But for now, it's just going to be Convoke City for Druids. Then we have Hunter. Hunter is going to be pretty interesting because we've gotten some good changes to Beast Mastery, and then we have a lot of marksmanship hunters on Suicide Watch. So the changes to Beast Mastery were basically buffing across the board all of their legendaries. We have reported on this already. Dark Command, Relic Stalker, Flame Walkers, and Kapla are all significantly buffed. Yeah, of course, it's not that buffing all 4 of them means you are that much stronger. You can only pick one, After you have picked one of those 4, the fact that the other 3 were buffed is irrelevant. You can look at the glass half full in the prospect of using 2 legendaries and knowing that all of the other legendaries are stronger as well. You can say you also got a tiny buff, I guess, to Survival. Latent Poison Injectors was buffed by 15%. Marksmanship has gotten their 2 underrepresented legendaries changed, Charging Shots and Eagle Talons through focus, but the main change, of course, is to Serpent Stalker's Trickery. This is where Marksmanship Hunters are singing their demise already, because the legendary itself no longer triggers Wild Spirits twice. Of course, Wild Spirits triggers when you use an ability. Because Serpent Stalker's Trickery makes your aim shot also cast a Serpent Sting, you were basically casting two abilities, meaning Wild Spirits will proc twice. This has now been changed. Now, the extra cast of Serpent Sting with your aim shot no longer counts as an extra ability, so Wild Spirits will no longer proc twice. I believe some numbers experts have already pointed out this is going to be a 15 to 20% nerf in AoE to marksmanship, and a little bit less, something like 5 to 7% nerf in single target, something like that. I do think, of course, it was necessary when it comes to this type of damage, just like I thought, Convoke nerf or even Fire Mage nerf would have been okay. I'm not even sure if this counts as a nerf or if it's just a fix. Remember that this same problem was going on for Beast Mastery Hunter, because Beast Mastery also had a similar situation with Stomp of your pet. You would use Barb Shot and proc Wild Spirits, and then your pet would use Stomp because you use Barb Shot, and it would also proc Wild Spirits, and Blizzard fixed that in like 2 days. But kept this interaction with this legendary for like 3 months. So it's interesting to see their MO in fixing this. Outside of the legendary changes, you have gotten the expected couple of buffs to the Covenant abilities, that Chakram and Flay Shot. I am particularly excited about Flay Shot. I think this is a very large buff to Flay Shot, 4 seconds longer duration, no more costing focus. Now it also gives you 25% more damage on kill shot when it procs, and now the proc chance has been increased, almost doubled. I think it's a much stronger single target Covenant ability now compared to before. And now Wild Spirits, which is your strong AoE Covenant, has been nerfed. So maybe in time we will see more hunters moving towards a more single target focused role and taking Flay Shot instead of staying in their current AoE spec with Wild Spirits. When it comes to mages, we have gotten a very simply buff across the board for all of the underrepresented covenants. So Radiant Spark, flat buff by 20%, Deathborn was buffed in both duration and spell power gain, and Mirrors of Torment was buffed for Arcane and Fire, since Mirrors of Torment for Venthyr is already picked for Frost, so the Arcane and Fire part was buffed. When it comes to legendaries, again, underrepresented legendaries were buffed, Cold Front and Freezing Winds for Frost Mage, Molten Skyfall, which is basically the fire equivalent of Cold Front, was also buffed, Arc and Harmony for Arcane, and the two neutral legendaries, Disciplinary Command and Expanded Potential. I was particularly excited for Disciplinary Command, simply because I was thinking in the prospect of 2 legendaries at the same time, and Disciplinary Command is a very good combo legendary, is a very good support legendary. So this buff was looking good. On its own though, when you can use only one legendary, it loses a bit of value, The whole highlight of the mage changes for me is Sun King's Blessing. I was really worried about this change, changing the proc from 12 hot streaks to 8 and the combustion duration from 5 to 6 seconds. I was really worried because, again, I was thinking mistakenly, or rather positively, I was thinking of the possibility of using 2 legendaries in 9.1. Turns out very likely it's going to be 9.2, so we are a little bit early to talk about that. I think Sun King's Blessing is really, really dangerous when it comes to scaling for Fire Mage. Yeah, it's not going to happen now because you won't have 2 legendaries now, but I think it's just sweeping the problem under the rug. The problem being the scaling, the late game scaling of Fire Mage. So yeah, for now we can just not talk about this, but I do think it's going to be a problem eventually. Then we have monks. Oh boy. So monks, after hunters on Suicide Watch, we have another spec joining hunters in the Suicide Watch department, which is Windwalker. The changes to monk weren't major. They weren't, loud. Mistweaver, for example, wasn't really touched that much. They've gotten a change to Clouded Focus, which is a shit legendary that nobody cares about, and they were changed in their Vivify and Renewing Mist mana costs. Brewmaster's abilities were pretty much not touched. The only change was given to their defensive legendary, Mighty Power, which is still likely not going to be taken. Brewmasters are already equipped with a lot of defensiveness, so they try to go for a little bit of more of a hybrid choice in the legendary. Stormstout Last Keg is giving you both extra damage as well as extra defense in the form of reduced brew cooldowns. They are actually way more likely to go for full offense rather than full defense by taking Charred Passions as a legendary compared to Mighty Power. Although it's still good that you have another option, an extra option in your legendary arsenal for Brewmaster. Windwalker has gotten an okay buff to Juen's Battle Gear, almost basically doubled in its effects. 50% crit chance on your Rising Sun King instead of 30, and double cooldown reduction on your Fist of Fury from 2.5 to 5 seconds. The real change though comes to their abilities. This entire fucking wall of text of fixed issues. This is now a standard for monks. If you've ever played monk or taken any interest in the changes to monks, you will see this pretty much every single patch. A myriad of fixes to Windwalker, and mostly related around Torment and Fire, and interaction with things like Zhuen, things like abilities used by your copies and whatnot. Well, this time though there is a problem, because it just so happened that one of the many issues, for once in the Windwalker's life, one of the many issues caused, one of the many bugs caused by Torment and Fire was actually causing them to do more damage. They weren't actually being nerfed by a bug, they were being buffed. What was happening? What was happening was that when you used Fist of Fury, so when you started channeling Fist of Fury and all your copies started also channeling Fist of Fury, if you cancelled Fist of Fury yourself, your copies would just continue channeling Fist of Fury. You would go on with your rotation, Rising Sun Kick, Whirling Dragon Punch, the copies would replicate it, but they would still be channeling Fist of Fury. This is particularly important because most Windwalker monks are Kyrian. Kyrian plays with Weapons of Order. Weapons of Order gives a lot of importance and value to Rising Sun Kick. It devalues Fist of Fury a lot, which makes it so that it's literally more convenient to you to stop channeling Fist of Fury and go on with your rotation. And this allowed you to do extra damage because your copies were essentially bugged and they wouldn't stop channeling Fist of Fury. Unfortunately, in Blizzard's quest to quench the never-ending spawning bugs of Windwalker, they also stopped this one, which is a damage increase. That is why the monks are crying, that is why the monks are in full Doomsayer mode. They're already talking about the nerf. 6% nerf in single target with this change. We'll have to see how bad it's going to be. And that's pretty much all of the changes happening to Monk. They haven't really gotten much of anything else in the changes. After Monk, you have Paladin. Similarly, Paladin hasn't gotten too many changes to their abilities and spells. You have gotten something we have covered before already. This happened in hotfixes though, especially after a couple of AWCs, a couple of PvP tournaments, highlighting the never-ending mana of Holy Paladin. They were touched in their mana regeneration a little bit. This patch is only going to nerf a little bit more the mana cost of Holy Shock, and then a pretty disappointing change to the Covenants. Paladin is pretty much only playing with the Kyrian or Venthyr, Ashen Hallow or Divine Toll, and then the change to Vanquisher's Hammer is that now it generates 1 Holy Power, so it's a pretty disappointing buff. Also, pretty hilarious that the Blessing of Seasons, the Night Fae Covenant ability for Paladin was basically not touched at all. It's like Blizzard gave up, even trying to make this piece of shit viable for Paladin. They just said, okay, guys, forget about it. Maybe it will get a rework in 9.2 or something. When it comes to the Legendaries have gotten some pretty decent change for Ret, because Final Verdict is now going to give you 15% flat more damage on your Templar's Verdict, which is a very good single target change. Protection has gotten the rework to their Ardent Protector Sanctum Legendary, which is a good defensive legendary. Rot already has some very powerful offensive legendaries. I don't think this is going to be used for the same reasons I already mentioned, and I will keep mentioning for other specs. The double legendary thing. I thought this would have been exciting in the prospect of pairing this legendary with something else. Now that we know you can only use one still in 9.1, I don't think it's going to be as powerful. Similar thing for the neutral legendary, Vanguard's Momentum. I also thought this would have been a very good support legendary after it was being buffed. Unfortunately, on its own, as a single use legendary, with nothing else around it, it just can't keep up with the other choices of Paladin. Holy has gotten buffs all around. Inflorescence of the Sunwell was buffed from 20 to 30% effectiveness of Infusion of Light. Unfortunately, you don't even use Infusion of Light as a Paladin, so... And then more importantly, Marad's Dying Breath received a pretty big buff to no longer increasing the self-damage taken on Light of the Martyr, and when you're using this legendary, you're also making your Light of the Martyr's damage be dealt over time. So it's a very handy, I guess, Mythic Plus use type of legendary, because Light of the Martyr is predominantly used as a spot heal ability in Mythic Plus, if you're using it at all. Moving on to Priest. Priest has gotten some decent legendary changes. Cauterizing Shadows to Discipline Priest is particularly buffed. Holy Priest has gotten a whole change around Divine Image. I mentioned, disappointingly, ever since the beta, we're talking like October, that Divine Image was a piece of garbage because it was broken and barely ever worked. Blizzard is now attempting to give Divine Image some damage component to the legendary, which is cool since Holy Priest has no damage at all, so maybe this can help, but I don't think so. Flesh Concentration buff is also pretty good for Holy. The Shadow Priest legendary buffs aren't really that big of a deal. The main changes come around their abilities, not so much their legendaries. Divine Hymn for Holy Priest was buffed. Now it's going to be giving you 20% extra healing taken instead of 10%, although the time is reduced. Instead of lasting 15 seconds, it lasts for 8. So basically you get twice as much healing in half the duration. And more importantly, much more importantly, Spirit Shell was nerfed. The Absorb is not going to be 100% of your healing done, but only 80%, and the absorption limit is now going to be scaling with your spell power instead of the target's maximum health. It is likely that eventually, with the scaling of your spell power, this is going to be even stronger than max HP, but for now it's a nerf. And then, of course, the 80% healing done cap is also a nerf. If you want a TLDR, no, doesn't mean anything for raids. They're still going to be like a mandatory pick in raids. It's not going to change anything. All in all, I think the changes are okay. I don't think Priest is in a bad situation. You know, Discipline and Shadow are both very good. Holy Priest, I know, it's the usual. Very high HPS and throughput, not really any damage reduction, and poor cooldowns, so it's kind of bad, underplayed at the very least. The changes at the very least for Holy are pretty good, both to their legendaries and to their main cooldown, Divine Hymn, trying to make it a little bit stronger. After Priest, we have Rogue. Oh boy, so Rogue has gotten a lot of changes. I don't think they're going to do anything, but we're going to go over them anyways. The legendaries were all changed and buffed across the board for Rogue. Doomblade and Duskwalker's patch for Assassination, Guile Charm, Greenskin Wickers and Concealed Blunderbuss for Outlaw, and the Rotten and Deathly Shadows for Subtlety. So in a very short anti-LDR way, none of this matters in the prospect of using a single legendary. None of these legendaries are going to make up and become the best in slot legendary for any of these specs. Outlaw will still be using Celerity, no matter the buffs to these other legendaries. And Sub is still going to use Akari's Soul or Finality, and none of these legendaries are going to do anything to it. But again, if you want to look at the glass half full, if you want to play the long con, at least now you have stronger second legendaries for your eventual use of two legendaries at the same time, I guess. The only kind of interesting one is the Duskwalker's patch for Assassination. The old Legion legendary for reducing the cooldown of your Vendetta is the only possible one. When it comes to the abilities, we have gotten yet again another change to Flagellation, trying to make it more viable, and of course the already reported slight rework of Serrated Bone Spike, making it hit for more, being more impactful on the single first hit, and less so on the bleed on the dot. And then another myriad of fixes. The main changes were around Assassination. Assassination basically lost the rank 2 of Slice and Dice, and in return, they have gained extension on their Slice and Dice whenever they use Envenom, and 1 extra energy on their Venomous Wound passive. Overall, this is a buff. Overall, this is an energy buff to Assassination, albeit a very minor one. It's not the type of changes Assassination needs to become good. Not even strong, just good. Shaman also has gotten a lot of changes overall. Elemental has gotten the whole rework. Elemental has gotten its damage shifted away from Lava Burst. Lava Burst was nerfed by 10% at the cost, or rather at the benefit of buffing Earthquake and Earthshock primarily. 70% more damage to Earthquake and 30% more damage to Earthshock. Enhancement was also buffed, 40% more damage to Lava Lash. A twice as strong Stormkeeper, but now only works with Chain Lightning, so it's just going to be an AoE talent, an AoE ability. The only eyebrow raising in all these changes is the fact that Restoration also got a 10% Lava Burst nerf. You know, amongst all the screaming of Restoration Shaman's strength in their Flavor of the Month state, if there is one thing people don't get to complain about Resto is the damage. Restoration Shaman doesn't have particularly high damage. It is in fact amongst the lowest specs when it comes to damage done. And then Blizzard wanted to shift away the damage of Elemental away from Lava Burst, and for some reason Lava Burst was also hit by a nerf for Restoration. The only benefit for Restoration is that Chain Lightning, buffed by 35%, is also going to buff them. But Chain Lightning hits like a peanut, so nobody really cares. Shaman has gotten buffs across the board when it comes to their Covenants, of course, due to mostly the popularity of Primordial Wave. Vesper Totem buffed by 25%, Fate Transfusion buffed by 25% in damage and 60% in healing conversion of the damage. Chain Harvest was buffed by 15% for Elemental. Primordial Wave was buffed from 100% to 150% extra damage on the Lightning Bolt for enhancement. And when it comes to the legendaries, you have a slight retouching of Echoes of the Great Sundering for Elemental. Because of the base buff of Earthquake, 70% more damage of Earthquake, they nerfed the legendary that buffs Earthquake as a result. It is still a net buff for you. This is just to make it so that this legendary wasn't going to become the strongest legendary for every type of target. Profiling, single target, 2 targets, 3 targets, 5 targets. If they kept it like it was before, it would have been the best overall. Tiny buff for announcement on Legacy of the Frost Witch, and also tiny buffs to Restoration, to Jonat's Natural Focus, and Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. Again, interesting legendaries. If it was a double legendary situation, it's not, so it's not really that impactful. After Shaman, we have Warlock. So the Covenant abilities were slightly buffed: Impending Catastrophe and Decimating Bolt. Decimating Bolt went from 100% more damage based on target's missing health from 60%, and Impending Catastrophe damage has been increased 10% when the missile moves through targets, and then 15% more damage on the explosion. Demonology has gotten a buff to Cold Dread Stalkers. Both their base attack power scaling and their abilities were buffed by 10%. Then we have the legendary retouches of Warlock. Malefic Wrath and Wrath of Consumption for Affliction were both buffed. Implosive Potential Seist for Demonology was buffed, together with Bale Spider's Burning Core and Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling, and for Destro, Madness of the Ajakir and Embers of the Diabolic Raiment were all buffed. Of course, the point of the patch was to buff the underperforming and underrepresented legendaries, so this is all fitting with the plan of Blizzard. Warrior, on the other hand, has gotten more changes. Warrior has gotten legendary changes to all 3 specs. Enduring Blow, Battlelord, and Exploiter were all buffed. For arms, Cadence of Fujeda, Will of the Berserker, and Reckless Defense were all buffed. For Fury, Cadence of Fujeda and Will of the Berserker were duration buffs, 50% longer duration on these legendary effects. The main changes here were happening to protection. Unbreakable Will is now going to give you a second charge of Shield Wall, and more importantly, Reprisal. Reprisal has now been redesigned. Whenever you charge and whenever you intervene, you now gain Shield Block, Revenge, and you generate 20 Rage. This is a similar change to the Dancing Rune weapon change of Blood Decay when it comes to going from pack to pack in Mythic Plus. Now, as a warrior, you can charge a new pack and get all these benefits right at the start of the pool. That is basically the main benefit of changing this legendary. When it comes to non-legendary changes, you have gotten 10% more damage buff to Protection Warrior and an extra 10% increased damage to Thunderclap, as well as Conqueror's Banner being redesigned. Now, Conqueror's Banner is going to give you 400 mastery whenever you use it, as well as a few other buffs, extra movement speed, rage generation, and whatnot. It's going to be interesting to see if this becomes meta, specifically when you go into Mythic Plus groups with like a Balanced Druid or a Fire Mage, having to run close to the warrior because the warrior is about to drop the banner and the Fire Mage wants to use Combustion and he wants the 400 mastery buff, something like that. So far, Protection Warriors are going mostly Kyrian for Spear of Bastion. It's gonna be interesting between the Fleshcraft buff, big buff of Necrolord, and the Conqueror's Banner rework for Necrolord Warriors, if Protection Warriors in particular are going to move to Necro as their new mainstay covenant. Now, these were all the changes we have seen so far when it comes to specs, when it comes to abilities, legendaries, covenant abilities, and some passive and talent changes to many of the specs. We have seen some attempts at buffing, for example, Blood Decay and Protection Warrior, some nerfs to Vengeance Demon Hunter. We have not seen, if you have noticed, many nerfs. Many nerfs, for example, to Balanced Druid, to Fire Mage. We have seen nerfs to Windwalker Monk and Marksmanship Hunter, but those were technically fixes, like bug fixes, not even actual nerfs. We have not seen also nerfs to Holy Paladin or Restoration Shaman in favor of other healing specs. Holy Paladin, just the mana regeneration, slightly. No real focus was being put on the balancing in terms of nerfing, No stick this patch, just carrots. After the classes, we have some other changes that go beyond just the balancing and the tuning of the specs. We have gotten some changes to the adventurers for the mission table. The interesting part is that Kyrian and Venthyr are basically untouched, and this time the buffs are going to Necrolord and Nightfae. Nightfae, it's after the whole nerfs to the Dreamweaver and Trapper build combo, which have left behind the fact that many of the other companions of Nightfae are pretty shit. You were basically thinking that Nightfae was super powerful simply because of that combo with Dreamweaver. After that combo was nerfed, then the other companions weren't as strong, turns out. So Blizzard is buffing them. The more confusing one is the buffs to the Necrolord companions. Necrolord is pretty strong already, so it's interesting to see all of these buffs. But then again, we're talking about mission tables, something nobody should care about. So let's just go past this. Another thing we have touched already in dungeons is that Domina Venomblade Brute Assassins will no longer trigger the necrotic affix, just like the General Cal's Gauntlet Stonewall Gargons are no longer going to trigger necrotic. Pretty good changes to make necrotic more bearable. We then have the whole Mythic plus Valor point system. The introduction of Valor points. You can gain 750 each week. There is a maximum of 1500 you can keep on yourself at any time. The weekly Valor cap will start at 5000 from the get-go, and then increase to 5750 and then 6500, while still being able to only hold 1500 on you at any given time. You need an achievement to unlock the maximum item level in which you can upgrade your pieces of gear from Mythic Plus. You need to complete all dungeons at +5 to be able to upgrade your gear up to 207. You need to complete all dungeons at +10 to be able to upgrade your items up to 213 item level, and then you need to complete all dungeons at +15 if you want to upgrade them at 220. There is also the addition that you're now going to be getting 2 items from completing a Mythic Plus key even if you deplete it. The only caveat is that the item level of the second item you receive on depletion is going to be slightly lower than the item level intended for the key. So you are doing a +15 key, you complete the key, you get a 210 item level piece, and then because you depleted it, your second item will be 207 instead of 210. This is still a buff because you can still upgrade with Valor all of these items you are getting, so it is still better than before if you're depleting the key. There is also the change that the Great Vault is now going to require 3 6-9 raid bosses instead of 3 7-10, as well as for raids, the change that Potency Conduits will now drop in Castle Natria. Of course, 213 in Heroic and 226 in Mythic. We now also have the end game finished activities change. Whenever you reach 40 Renown and whenever you are capped in souls, your weekly reward is going to give you instead 1500 gold after you have gathered 1000 anima, and 500 anima after you have gathered all the souls from the Maw. Then Blizzard tried to push for this change. It worked out well because they reverted this in like 24 hours. They wanted Mythic Keystones to decrease every week by 1 unless you were completing a key of a similar level. Currently in Shadowlands, before this patch goes live, you are getting every week a key which is 1 level lower than your highest key you have completed. So if you complete, for example, a +17 key, every single week you will be getting a +16 key in your Great Vault because your highest key was a 17. Now they wanted to do this. You're going to get a 16 key, but then if you don't complete a 16 that week, you will be getting a 15. And if you don't complete a 15 that week, you will be getting a 14, etc, etc. Blizzard has reverted this, and now they have gone back to the BFA version, +1. So in BFA, if you completed a 10, you are getting a 9. If you completed a 15, you are getting a 14. Now it's just going to be the exact same level of the key you completed that week. No more -1 bullshit. You complete a 10 last week, you're getting a 10 this week. You complete a 15 last week, you're getting a 15 this week. Very, very simple and much better. And then we have the change to the Covenant ability, which is just for Necrolord. Flashcraft has been redesigned. The channel goes to 3 seconds instead of 4. The Absorb shield is now 40% of your max health instead of 20. You no longer need to be close to elite enemies to increase the shield. You're now always getting a 40% HP max shield. And then the new addition, the better addition, is that now you're also taking 20% less damage reduction while you are channeling. Another extra passive effect cooked in is that moving near an enemy's corpse consumes their essence to reduce Fleshcraft's cooldown by 1 second. And you no longer need to actually channel this in Plaguefall to gain the buffs, the dungeon buff for your Covenant. You just have to run past them to gain the buff. Soulbind effects are also getting changed based on the new version of this ability. Volatile Solvent for Marilet is now going to trigger when Fleshcraft's passive effects works, and Resourceful Fleshcrafting for Harmir is going to reduce the cooldown of your Fleshcraft by an extra second whenever you pass next to a corpse. Very, very good change to Fleshcraft. Together with Necrolord though, there is another change, although it's not actually a Covenant ability change, is more like an effect because the buff given by your Venthyr Covenant in dungeon has been changed for Halls of Atonement and Sanguine Depths. For Venthyr, Lawyer Stormborn now lasts 45 seconds instead of 30. When you pick it up, you charm it. But the price for that is that the damage is now going to be reduced by 50%, even though the duration has been increased. So 50% more duration from 30 to 35 at the cost of 50% damage. This is a nerf, by the way. There is no way around it. The buff comes to the other one, to Sanguine Depths. As I mentioned when I tracked this change, this is good. nerfing the effect of the buff to Halls of Atonement considering how easy Halls of Atonement is, and buffing the effect on Sanguine Depths considering how much harder Sanguine Depths is pretty good. Anima Cage now persists for 1 minute instead of 45, so you have more time to group up the enemies and get the buff. And the buff, Sinful Boon, is gonna last 75 seconds instead of 60. Also, undocumented change but very welcome, moved one of the Anima Cages away from a patrolling Chamber Sentinel. Pretty sure you know which one we're talking about, is the one on the corridor right before the bridge, which was also pretty annoying to deal with because of that annoying Gargon walking back and forth. Then there is a change, a quality of life change for Venthyr again for the Ember Court, for your RSVPs, for obtaining RSVPs, particularly Droman. Droman Aliot's RSVPs is pretty good because it no longer has you go from Bastion to Maldraxxus for items. So it's just going to be quicker for you, for anyone who is doing the Ember Court. We also have changes to Torghast. Description of each wing is now available before embarking on any given Torghast run, and to better increase your odds of success, a recommended item level will now be displayed when selecting a layer. And lastly, they are reducing the amount of enemies on multiple floors. This might even be a nerf if you want to be pedantic, because less enemies means less resources to buy your powers. But then again, it means you're going to be faster, so everyone should be happier about this. And then a change to the Mo. Account-wide unlock has been added to Venari that reveals teleport nodes on all the long walkable chains in Torghast, so you can quickly cross the chains and no longer have to face your fear of heights. Lastly, we close the patch with PvP. We have to close the patch with PvP. We have gotten changes, attempts from Blizzard to change the epic battlegrounds, Wintergrasp, Isle of Conquest, and Ashran. I'm not going to express myself on all of these changes. Most people are, pessimistic and cynical about these, mostly because they don't care about epic battlegrounds. They don't even want to know the changes to Ashran. They just ignore Ashran as a principle anyways. So I'm not sure these changes are going to do much of anything. But yeah, these were all the changes we are getting in 9.0.5 to the classes and the specs and the Covenant abilities and the Legendaries, and then all of the extra from PvP to Torghast to the Mo to the Covenant buffs in dungeons, the rewards in Mythic Plus, the addition of Valor points and all of that. And yes, I will reiterate, I'm not even gonna bother pointing out all the anima power changes because really, seriously, who cares? But just in case you might be complaining that I haven't included them, here they are. There you go. These are all the anima changes for Torghast, for all the specs. So now you have that one as well. Now, with this patch recap done, we can close the video. It's gone already long enough. So I leave you with all of these changes. See you guys tomorrow. And in the meantime... Oh, it's cold again here. It's raining.